Okay, so rather than have you watch like a 20-minute long video of me essentially doing the same thing from this point up to this point, I decided just to finish the drawing ahead of time and then talk about it afterwards. Okay, so like I said, all I did to fill out the rest of the tree was just create those abstract shapes. Make sure the texture of the leaves is the same from this point all the way down to this point, right? I talked about getting kind of tired and lazy after doing so many of these little tiny shapes. An example of that is actually right here, right? I wanted to leave this here. This is at this point I was almost done with the tree, but I had already felt like I had been doing this for too long. Okay, that's why this part looks kind of weird, and this whole bottom section actually doesn't really look as good as say this top section at the apex or this middle section here, right? And it's just it happens, right? If it was worse than this, and if like it was super distracting, then I would change it. Some would argue that it already is distracting, um, but in my opinion, as long as it's not terribly, terribly wrong, and you can kind of get away with it because this is a tree and trees are pretty abstract, you're fine, right? However, this section here with the trunk, you actually cannot you can't get lazy with that part. Okay, the reason being this trunk here and these small branches, these are not abstract shapes, right? This is a cylinder, or in this case, since it's flat, it's two lines, right? It's just two straight lines. And these branches here, this one right here and this one right here, same thing. Two lines for this branch and two lines for this branch. If I were to look at the reference image, right, this branch needs to be uh, smaller than this branch here. And I need to translate that proportion over to my drawing, because if I didn't, then it would look strange. It would look very off, right? You would definitely be able to tell that this branch is not the same as what's happening on the reference image, okay? So the rule of thumb to kind of remember is if it's an abstract shape, as in it's not just a square, line, triangle, circle, or something that you can name, okay, it needs to be proportional. All right, it needs to follow the same rules as before. If it is an abstract shape, then it doesn't have to follow those rules to the dot, right? It still needs to follow them somewhat, but you can get away with a lot more with abstract shapes. Okay. Now I want to address how I addressed this bush at the bottom here. Okay, so because it's a different type of texture, right, in the image, right, this here you can see it's kind of like a softer, more rounded texture than the leaves of this tree, right? If I zoom in really close on the leaves of this tree, you can see it's very like pointy and rigid and things like that. However, if we move down here, it's kind of soft and pillowy in comparison. Okay, so I didn't want to, because it was abstract, I didn't want to draw every single little leaf again, right? I just looked at the shapes and made a softer texture around it. It's still an abstract form, but the texture is much softer. And this difference between this texture and this texture is is what's what is causing you to be able to see that these two parts are different types of trees, or at least different types of objects. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention to that as well when you're filling out the front here.